I think there's a lot of people that are waking up. I think people are seeing, especially if you live in the inner cities, what they're doing to these communities with these riots and these protests, and they're seeing who's defending it and who's not. So it's going to be touch and go, but the thing that scares me the most is the mail-in voting.
All right, thanks as always for joining us on the Daily Caller. Today I've got the privilege of our great guest, Candace Owens, who is the founder and the operator of Blexit. How would you describe Blexit?
It's a movement, black exit from the left and progressivism, and it's a movement for minorities to embrace conservative principles.
And you also have a new book coming out, Blackout, in mid-September.
Yeah, September 15th.
And we can pre-order it now.
You can pre-order it now.
Okay, and what's the topic of the book, Blackout?
It just kind of lays out my argument. The subheading of the book the subtitle is How Black America Can Make Its Second Escape from the Democrat Plantations. And I sort of laughed at an old Washington Post hit piece about me that was saying that I've popularized the phrase Democratic plantation for conservatives, and it's super offensive. And so I basically laid out my argument that the Democrats have really just updated the very same techniques that they used towards Black Americans on the plantations in terms of, suppressing education. Illiteracy rates are staggering right now in Black America. The strategic breakdown of family. And I just sort of go through all of those points to sort of arrive at why I think the Black needs to leave the Democrat Party.
It's interesting. Certainly in my career in media and politics, I've never seen race be more focused upon. And why is that? Why is the conversation revolving so much about race all the time?
Yeah, well, I think what the left realizes, it's not just race, it's also, sexism, misogyny, all of these little subgroups you can break people into. And the idea is that you want people when they go to the polls to vote emotionally, not rationally. So you want them to think that there's something that they're really at risk of losing. For Black America, you're going to lose all of your freedoms. You're going to step back in to a world where Blacks can't go into certain restaurants because of the color of their skin, unless you vote for your liberal savior. For women, they're going to send you back. There's going to be no advancements for women. The patriarchy is here. It's looming. It's large, unless you vote for this Democrat candidate, Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. These people are going to rescue you somehow from all of these ills that plague society. So it's strategic. It's all strategy for them, and they play on people's emotions, and at the same time they ruin people's lives in the process.
So race gets then used as an explanation for anything that's going wrong in somebody's life. And in America, there are things that are going wrong for sure. Life expectancy has been dropping the past few years in the United States. Suicides are at record levels and made worse by the pandemic, actually, and the government lockdowns associated with them. Opioid overdoses have gotten worse. So there's all these negative consequences that are happening. If it's not race, what is it?
There are a ton of things that we should be talking about. I think really, and something that never gets discussed, is that right now we are suffering from peace. And what I mean by that is that when you look at every single generation, and I talk about this in my book, they've done something great, right? There was something to fight for. Ending World War I, ending World War II, ending the Vietnam War, boys going overseas and fighting for something that was bigger than themselves. They were united by that. Well, we've suddenly arrived amongst a group of people who are the most spoiled and privileged people that have ever lived in the history of the world. If you were born in America after 1980, you are part of the most privileged class of people that have ever lived. And I think that there's something in the human spirit that wants to triumph, right? That wants to say, we did this, we put an end to that. It was us that boycotted and protested and put an end to, the civil rights era and all the battles that were going on. Unfortunately, there's really nothing for millennials to fight an end because we're remarkably privileged, millennials and beneath. And so there's something that they're yearning for, and they're not getting it in this climate of social media, Instagram hashtags, everything so quick and flippant. And so they're striking at almost an emptiness that's inside of them that they're trying to fulfill through all of these various meaningless social justice pursuits.
Sure. So in the end, they basically crave some sort of mantle of oppression. So they have something that they can overcome.
Yeah, we ended bathroom signs. Now it can't. That's it. That's what they're working on. These sorts of meaningless things because they want to do something.
What do you think of the rioting that's happening across the country? It continues to the day that we're speaking now.
I think that, either I have a crystal ball and I can see into the future, or this was the most predictable thing to possibly happen in the midst of an election cycle. I've been saying this, shouting this for the last 3 years. Get ready, Black America, because in 2020, we're going to watch Black people die. We're going to be told, that race issues are the worst that they've ever been, and we're going to be used like pawns to further power for a political party that really is going to leave us behind if they get that power back. And it's happened. You can go back and watch me speaking for the last 3 years, and I've said this, and it's happened exactly as I said it's going to happen. These protests are remarkably funded. I don't care who you speak to. Nobody has the time or the patience to riot for months straight because one person was killed unarmed by a police officer. It's everywhere. It's everywhere you go. I mean, you even saw they were protesting in the UK about George Floyd.
Yes.
So this is way bigger. Antifa, it's organized. I mean, these people they've got bricks, they've got Molotov cocktails. We're looking at an organized cell of terrorism that's hiding behind the idea that they're trying to further civil rights. So I view Black Lives Matter as a terrorist group. I view Antifa as a terrorist group.
Yes.
And I think it's ridiculous to me that you have so many people that don't see that.
Now, as all things are in politics, it's condensed into two dimensions, of course. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter, I'm not aware of anybody who disagrees with the sentiment that Black Lives Matter. But the movement itself, there is disagreement. But to express that disagreement in public is to be construed as someone who doesn't care about Black lives. In other words, it's a strange situation you find yourself in. When you look at the organization, the people behind Black Lives Matter, what do you see?
There is no people. That's the problem. There is nobody behind Black Lives Matter. Who's the president of Black Lives Matter? Mm-hmm. Who are the people that are running Black Lives Matter?
A woman, when you try to question, a self-described Marxist.
Marxist. When you try to ask them, where is this money going? They have no offices. There is no organized cell, right? I mean, it's literally a terrorist organization. This is what you would expect if you were looking into the finances of ISIS, right? There are no answers. There are a couple of people that say that they're leading it, but they have no employees. And that's the problem right now. We know that in the week that George Floyd died, they raised $50 million. Where did that money go? Are there schools? If Black Lives Matter, are we attacking illiteracy rates? What are they doing in the community that they've been able to raise $50 million under an LLC structure? They are not a 501c3 organization. That's the scary stuff, and nobody's being meant to answer these questions.
So whatever the mystery is behind their organization, you laid out some of it. There's no mystery to at least one of their goals, which is to defund the police.
Defund the police.
And what would the impact be of defunding the police on communities of color?
Yeah, I mean, what would the impact be? It's going to be, you're going to see the impact socioeconomically, right? So the people that are supporting this stuff, people that live in gated communities and have their own security guards, there'll be no impact. But we're seeing what that impact is right now in the inner cities. We're seeing in New York City when I think they reported 2 weeks ago, a 267% increase in shootings and killings compared to the year before. That's what the impact is going to be. Right. There's not just this random vacuum that happens when you go, okay, we're going to get rid of the police, right? It doesn't mean that all of a sudden nothing happens. Somebody rises to take their place. That's going to be gangs that take those places, right? Because people are still going to look for some sort of a protection. This is the stuff that we got rid of in the 80s when New York City was really bad, right? Getting rid of the gang culture. You're seeing a return to that right now. We're seeing 1-year-olds being killed in the street. By the way, those 1-year-olds and those babies that are being shot and killed in the streets because they can't get any control over Chicago and Baltimore and New York City, they're not being buried in gold caskets like George Floyd. Yeah. It's incredible. And that's how you know this is political. This is not about Black lives. Stop pretending this is about Black lives. Everything that they're doing, everything about their mission is to harm Black lives. On their website, they've listed, they want to go against and to conquer the nuclear family, right? I mean, they're against families. They're anti-family. Go read Karl Marx, right? Go read the Communist Manifesto. That's exactly it. It literally mirrors everything, and all of the Communist Manifesto's goals is what Black Lives Matter is after. And why do they want to destroy the family? Because it's the only way that government can replace family, right? You have to make sure that there's nothing else. There can be nothing else that competes with the word of the government. There can be no God. There's a strong layer of atheism that we're seeing, right? There can be no religion, there can be no God, there can be no dad, there can be no mom, there can be only selfishness and narcissism and rioting and protesting and anger. And what we're seeing is a communist movement that is taking hold in America.
But the idea of the destruction of the nuclear family being one of their goals, which you're right, it is. It's interesting because you're one of a very few people who know that, because the media at large certainly doesn't talk about it. If the average Black American knew that the purpose of the so-called Black Lives Matter movement was the destruction of the nuclear family, would they be for it?
No, and that's really what I spell out in my book is no. This is everything that you're seeing is actually anti-Black. Black people are naturally very conservative, right? We are the most religious group in America, right? We are the only group that has what's called a Black church. I mean, it's so, it's an odd thing to say, what is the Black church? But there is a Black church. And the reason for that, the reason that we have such a stronghold on faith and on family is because it had to mean so much to us because of our earlier oppressions. I mean, even in the Reconstruction era following slavery, the number one thing that Black Americans did when they got their rights back was get married. They went and they looked for long lost relatives that were traded off onto different plantations. This stuff meant so much to Black America. Yeah. And now we're seeing an organization that was not put together by Black people, that is not funded by Black people, right? That money is not going to Black people, that is trying to strip away all of those things and say that they're doing it in the name of progressivism and because they want to be against racism. When actually, they're looking at the old playbook of what Democrats did when they had us as slaves and reintroducing it under this guise of progressivism.
You know, the emphasis on race has spawned some very bizarre things. We've seen things like Harvard having Black-only graduations. We've had constant emphasis on figuring out ways to divide people up on race, saying certain people aren't allowed to say certain things based on the color of their skin. We saw in one city a mask law that didn't apply to Black people, but only applied to white people during the pandemic because they said that Black citizens in the town would feel like they'd be seen as criminals if they were wearing masks. Yet the imposition would only then be on the white people of the town. There's something very, I don't know, neo-segregationist about all of this.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's and I spoke about this also in my book because there's also a college, I'm talking about your Black-only segregation point. There's another university, and I'm blanking on it at the moment, where they are now doing Black-only dorms. The reason for these Black-only dorms is that they looked around the college campus and they saw that it was majority white. Well, if you look around any room and you see majority white people, welcome to America. It's a majority white country. That would be like saying that you were a white person in Uganda and were surprised to look around your campus and saw that it was majority Black people. This is where we live, right? And they decided that that was a form of tokenism, that Black people even having to see white people was a form of tokenism. And they started proposing, it's called Williams College, I believe. They started proposing that Black people have their own dorms so they can have their safe space from white people. And all I can think about is Ruby Bridges, right? The woman who, the young lady, a child at that time, who ended segregation and fought for that and had to walk into school with people spitting and yelling and being protected by the federal government to end segregation. And now we have been invited into an environment where people are so ignorant that they're segregating themselves. I mean, it's implausibly stupid.
So what you're referring to is a legacy of harmony and ultimately nonviolence to advance genuine civil rights in the United States. But that seems to not be where we are now. Harmony, it's not about harmony at all. It's about disharmony. And it's not about nonviolence. It seems to be, there's definitely lots of violence happening in America's cities. And one of the things I've been struck by, Candace, is the complete trashing of American history that we've seen take place lately. Frederick Douglass, himself a freed slave, gives an incredible speech about the importance of the Declaration of Independence and the unfulfilled promise of America that needed to be fulfilled by the full integration of Black Americans. Yet, we now have this gigantic racial conversation in the United States, which is the U.S. itself is bad. Right. Everyone who set it up is bad. We need to reconsider the founding itself. 1776, forget it. We're going back to 1619, and it's going to be a dominant theme. It'll be so dominant that we're going to integrate the curriculum into all of our schools. Do you see this ever stopping? Do you see them ever taking their foot off the accelerator? Will this conclude?
They're not going to take their foot off of the accelerator. The question is, are conservatives going to put their foot on the accelerator? You know, that one of the weird paradoxes is that the problem with conservatives is that we have an element, a layer of respect, right? So if they rigged this entire election, right, and Joe Biden won because they said mail-in voting and we knew there was tons of frauds, how many conservatives do you think would go out and burn and riot and pull things down? Virtually no one, right? And this is why they're allowed to do this, because they know they will take it to that extreme to do what they want to do, and conservatives will never respond in that regard. This is the way that they were able to first and foremost take over the school system. The public school system is the biggest problem in America right now. You want to know why these people believe these things to be true? Go pick up a textbook. Go pick up pieces of paper that these kids are being passed around in elementary school, having to learn about their white privilege, right? They're learning that there's something fundamentally wrong with America. This started really when Jesse Jackson in, I believe, the 1980s, led a group of protesters of Black people onto Stanford University and said, hey ho, Western civ has got to go. Western civilization is not taught anymore in school because it's considered there's something wrong and backwards about learning about Western civilization. It's considered ethnocentric to learn about your country and learn about what's great about your country. Rather, they're replacing it with all of these really more like emotional training classes, right? Feminism 101, which is really just how to hate men, right? African American studies, which is really just a deep dive into why you should hate white people. And they're doing this under the name of saying multiculturalism, and this is going to make you a better person when it's not. It's making you a worse person because you know nothing about the country in which you live in. You don't even understand why it is that if this country is so horrible and so corrupt and so backward, why are so many people of color trying to get into this country, right? If being Black and being amongst Black people is so great, why do Black people fare worse amongst Black people? We are killed more if we are around Black people, if we are in all Black neighborhoods. We fail more in school if we are in all Black classes. If you think that being around Black people insulates you and it's a safe space, why don't we flourish under those conditions? Why are people in Africa trying to get into America? These are things that require critical thinking. The school system is not aimed at critical thinking anymore. It's aimed at memorization, right? It's aimed at this totalitarian state of liberalism, and not even liberalism, leftism, that is being taught on the universities. And that's the biggest uphill climb that we have right now in America. And unfortunately, nobody's doing anything about it.
I mean, it's manifested itself in extremely bizarre ways, and of course, damaging ones. We saw recently the National Museum of African American History here at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., where we're filming today. They created a chart of what white culture is. And the chart included things like hard work and like punctuality. And I think it included stuff about family structures. And I don't know about you. I read that chart and thought to myself, I'm sorry, doesn't everyone want the things that are written on this list? They seem like decent things. Yeah, good things.
Yeah.
Why are they uniquely white? And I mean, it seems like it'd be the kind of thing that a white supremacist would write, actually.
Right.
And it was featured at the National Museum of African American History. Why?
Because they're trying to destroy Black America. And I mean, and I shouldn't even say trying, they've successfully destroyed Black America. And they've done it via culture. They've done it by telling kids that there's something wrong with aspiring to do things right. You can see this now in certain schools. They're trying to say that even learning proper English is fundamentally wrong and racist, right? So they're talking about introducing courses in Ebonics, slang, that Black Americans need to develop their own subculture apart from white American culture. The problem is that this idea of separation and not actually rising to the challenge and getting smarter and competing and learning proper English, there's never been any group of people that have lagged behind another group of people that have gotten ahead by this method. A great example of this is David Hume. When he challenged the Scottish people, when they were trailing behind the English people for so long, he turned to the Scottish people and he said to them in the 17th century, we've got to learn proper English. Right? Rather than them saying having to learn proper English is wrong and it's racist, they rose to the challenge. And within a couple of decades, the Scots actually passed the English in engineering and in science, right? Because they rose to the challenge. I mean, and you can see this all over the world. The Malays in China. I mean, over and over again, history teaches us this lesson that the only way to get ahead is through hard work.
Yeah.
So what happens when you look at a group of people like Black Americans and you say to them, actually no work. You shouldn't have to do any work. It should just be handed to you on a silver platter, right? They're going to fail. And that's exactly what's happening. We're floundering.
Meanwhile, rich Americans are having their kids learn Mandarin so they can do business in China.
Of course, because that's where the future of the world's going to be. And this is something that Black Americans would understand if they were perhaps learning, free markets and capitalism, and learning that it really doesn't matter how you feel, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to compete in the real world, right? So somebody putting you into, let's say, a school that you don't deserve to be in, which is what affirmative action is, positive discrimination, positive racism,
yes.
Right? What ends up happening is there is actually not one empirical piece of evidence that affirmative action has been good for the Black community. There's tons of evidence that it's been bad for us because you're mismatching kids who don't know the answers. So putting a kid in a school, putting a kid that belongs and could possibly be at the top of their class at the University of Rhode Island, but instead putting them at Harvard University amongst kids that they shouldn't be around, they actually end up being at the bottom of the class. Right? They end up being in academic probation. Thomas Sowell wrote extensively about his experience at Cornell University, realizing that all of the Black kids were on academic probation, him going and actually wanting to look into why the reason was, and it was because none of them should have been at Cornell University in the first place. Mind you, they were smart kids. They would have done great somewhere else. It's not good for your self-esteem to be put in a classroom where you can't flourish and everyone's smarter than you.
Sure. And what if you're genuinely smart and there on merit, and people assume that the reason you're there is because there's an affirmative action program that probably got you through the door?
That's exactly right. It's bad for self-esteem of Black students. And so we're seeing more and more of this. And unfortunately, because this barrier is educational, because they have been so good at first breaking down the family, forcing the kids to run to the street, forcing the kids to rely upon cultural icons like Jay-Z and Beyonce for their next instruction on what to do. Jay-Z and Beyonce become mom and dad. Then you completely strip away the education system and they're not learning anything, right? So when you're seeing these protests, what you're actually seeing is what happens when any human being is ignorant. You're seeing toddlers. Why do toddlers throw tantrums? Why do toddlers scream and yell and freak out and throw themselves on the floor over a popsicle? Because their worldview is limited. Sure. They're incredibly ignorant. To them, that is the biggest thing in the world. That popsicle that you're telling them that they can't have is the end of their entire existence, because they do not yet have the education and the experience, for them to put things in their proper context. That is literally what you are seeing white liberals apply to Black America, a toddler syndrome.
So in other words, when you infantilize the culture, don't be surprised when they act that way.
That's exactly correct.
So when it comes to the family, you mentioned the family a lot. I have bad news. The family's collapsing among all races.
More so amongst Black Americans.
That's true. But basically, Black people got there first. And now we're watching it among everyone, white people too, especially. And all of these sort of deaths of despair and the economic consequences that come with that, they're real, and they're definitely here in America. Are you convinced that there's anybody in our politics that cares at all about that?
I think there are tons of people who care about it, but I think what we're struggling with is that people are afraid. They're afraid to be canceled. They're afraid to lose their jobs, and they're afraid to be non-politically correct. I don't fall into that category. I am probably the most outspoken person against the trans movement. I saw that coming from a mile away. If you want to talk about the systemic breakdown of family, start telling kids that boys can be girls and girls can be boys, and everything is subjective and everything is fluid. You're not going to have kids that get up and get, raise up and become married and join a nuclear family set. You're setting these kids up for failure. So I've done a lot in terms of, inviting people that were formerly trans onto my show to talk about their experiences. And what they're really saying to me is that it's child abuse, and you're setting these people up for failure, and you're setting them up for failure. So you see the left making a big push towards that, right? Pick your gender, no gender bathrooms. That is an attack on the family. You see feminism. That's another cell that I routinely attack. The Me Too movement. Men can't, 2 boys, 3-year-olds wrestling is wrong. It's toxic masculinity. All of these terms that really just mean being a man is wrong. That is another attack on the family. Every single element, that's the one thing that connects everything the left does, is it's simply an attack on the family. So you're going to see that it's going to keep going up. You're saying the breakdown of family, it's going to keep going up until people start speaking up and rejecting this narrative. I mean, I don't have children yet, but I will be damned if my child goes to school and is told that they can pick their gender. I mean, I'll go crazy. And where are the parents that are going crazy on this? When I speak to conservative parents, you know what they tell me? I just don't want to be that parent in school. I don't want my kid, to be, bullied. We worked really hard to get them into this private school, whatever it is. And they're allowing the schools to raise their kids in this regard, to tell them there's something wrong with the color of their skin, that they can pick their gender any day, that, men are bad, that it's wrong to be a man. That is the problem with society. And I'll tell you this, there has never in the history of the world been a society that has survived without strong men. So that is the biggest threat to America right now. The only way I can really say it is the bitching of men, right? This attack on testosterone, this attack on masculinity. This is a real problem. I can only imagine what Russians and Chinese people are thinking. They're just waiting. You think the boys that I see on college campus today could possibly end World War II? You think they could get over and land on the beaches of Normandy and end World War II? The kids that are crying because Ben Shapiro's coming to speak on campus?
Not those kids, no.
Not those kids.
Although we do have to hand it to the millennials, because the millennials are the ones who went to Iraq, they went to Afghanistan, and that's a category of man that did serve and fought for this country for sure. It is now the pandemic has hit us, and a lot has changed in just a couple of short months. How much has it changed presidential politics? Do you think Donald Trump can win this election?
This is the greatest rigging of an American election that we are all playing a part in right now. You are telling me that first and foremost, we don't see the candidates. right? The candidates aren't allowed to travel. They can't talk about their policies. Who knows? They're already saying now, New York Times, that they need to not do debates, right? So we have the left who is completely hiding their candidate. That is their strategy. We're going to hide Joe Biden so you never have to meet him. And at the same time, we're going to tell the current president that he can't travel, that if he does any events, if he has, in a room full of people, that it's all dangerous, it's against safety measures, and it's not right. Then you have them talking about mail-in voting, which we know is corrupt. We know it's corruptible. We know that it allows for tons of rigging. The second coronavirus hit, my second tweet, and this is when conservatives were playing it safe. Everyone was like, oh, I don't know, maybe 8 million people are going to die, my second tweet was, this is going to be about November election, and they're going to request mail-in voting. Now we're having that conversation now. I said this back in March. Now people are starting to talk about the fact that Democrats are pushing for mail-in voting. At the same time, we had an economy that was absolutely rallying, right? Economy what used to be the expression, it's the economy, stupid, right? So this gave Trump the upper hand going into the election cycle, which is fair game. He's been the president for 4 years. He had a strong economy. Now they've crashed the economy, forced a ton of people that maybe would have been considered some conservative voting if they had a job, their lives were together. Well, now they're relying on the left's socialist system. They're relying on stimulus checks. And that means that they're going to be more inclined to vote for someone who has more socialist perspective because they're not allowed to work. Right? So that naturally puts them out of a category of voting that they would have maybe been in if things had been normal, right? So we've seen all of this stuff happen, and we're supposed to think that November is not being impacted by all of this. Of course it is, right? This is the greatest rigging in American history of an election.
So did they succeed? We're about 90 days out. Did they succeed?
I don't know if they succeeded. I mean, my hope is that, I'm an eternal optimist, and I think that from what I have seen, people that have been on the furthest left have come over to the right because they are seeing, some of this doesn't make sense. You're seeing people that are saying the protests are okay for health and safety, but God forbid, a hardworking American citizen wants to, work and be able to provide for their family. That's considered not safe. I think there's a lot of people that are waking up. I think people are seeing, especially if you live in the inner cities, what they're doing to these communities with these riots and these protests, and they're seeing who's defending it and who's not. So it's going to be touch and go, but the thing that scares me the most is the mail-in voting. It's a complete way for the left to completely rig the election.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is we already have a mountain of evidence demonstrating its failures because we had a range of primaries this year, many of which were complete disasters on a technical level. So forget fraud, which is of course a concern. You don't even need fraud to be able to make an indictment of the mail-in voting system. Right. In Maryland, in D.C., in Pennsylvania, in New York, they're not even done counting votes, and that took place weeks ago. So the mail-in voting system has been a disaster in the primaries. The test runs have failed spectacularly. What happens if even a single state is called into question in November?
I don't know. I don't know. And that's the stuff that scares me. And I think that, I saw this all coming. Again, do I have a crystal ball? No, it was common sense. If you think that 2020, which has been the strangest year ever, is strange just because, we just got some bad luck. No, this is politics in America. It's every 4 years. The crazy stuff starts happening every 4 years. And the left has not let up. And it's sad and it's scary. And I hope that what it's doing beyond anything else is just inspiring people to realize just how easy it could be to lose Western civilization, to lose America, to lose everything that they ever knew their entire lives.
So as you're describing it, you see there's a lot at stake in this country. When do you run for office?